Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. In this episode with me is Kurt and Lacey.
Hey.
Hello.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. In this episode, we're going to talk about small conventions and Hillcon specifically.
Hillcon.
And also, we're going to talk about competitive gaming. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix. Well, welcome to our special Hillcon episode. So for everyone else outside of the 17 people that were here that doesn't know what Hillcon is, we live on top of a giant hill in the middle of nowhere in the forest, and we have...
Ladies and gentlemen, you can't even see our house on Google Maps.
That's true, in the summertime at least. This is the second year now we've done it, or third year? Third year we've done it now.
It's the third year.
This is
the second named year.
Definitely
Right.
3.
So there are several of us that game, and about once a year we get everybody together all at the same time, usually in the fall, around October. And all told, including children, there are 17 people here at our house, and we game for a 3-day weekend. And it's the best 3 days in gaming in
Hillsdale,
western rural Indiana.
Indiana. Vermilion County, Indiana. Woo.
But something I just want to talk about briefly that kind of got me to thinking is, I've been gaming for a long time, and this is obviously the third time we've done it, but this is the first time that we've ever really done anything like this in my gaming career, where we specifically picked like a 3-day weekend and had lots of gaming, and even this time more than one game going on at the same time. And I think I just wanted to kind of encourage people to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we even at one point we had 2 event halls going. Down in Hall A, there was a homebrew Fallout game, but because the GM for that was relatively new, he had a hard cap of 4 players on his game, and so there was board games upstairs, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we played Spyfall and Discworld, and I feel like there was something else, but that's all I've got right now.
Yeah, we didn't do event ticketing because there were only two two halls, but
Cthulhu Pandemic,
Right on.
Pandemic,
which is a pretty cool game I hadn't played before.
So I just thought it was a really cool concept. I mean, like, everybody gets together to game. That's obviously what the hobby's all about. But I thought it was just neat to get everyone together all at once and have a large gathering of friends, sort of almost like the gaming version of tailgating.
I guess, I mean, there was definitely some other activities surrounding it, and in retrospect, I might have actually thought of, hey, maybe we should have put together a timetable a bit more just to make sure that we didn't have as much. Not that there was
Last year we actually had I'm going to call it a complete lack of plan.
Yeah, this year was much better.
This year we did talk at least a little bit about what kind of games we were going to run, player capacity for those games, what sort of things could be going on when those not involved in the RPGs were at break, and we put a lot of effort into kind of making a plan food-wise so that we could all eat with minimal amount of effort spent actually during the weekend.
Yeah, I'd forgotten to get in on the food planning very well.
There was lots of managerial things happening behind the scenes to make things go smoothly.
I swung by the Red and White grocery store, on my way here, picking up a stack of frozen pizzas, a bag of Swift Premium Brown and Serve sausages, and a case of beer.
I think each year we've done better about the planning aspect of it, because I felt like last year we didn't do as much gaming as I wanted to, but this year we made sure that happened a little bit better.
So yeah, I think the logistics and planning piece starts to become more and more important to help things flow more smoothly, so you don't spend as much downtime. Like, I noticed pre-cooked and frozen foods, like not like store bought, but like, hey, I made the breakfast casserole, stuck it in the chest freezer 3 nights ago. We're good to go for breakfast.
The Italian beef in the crock pot. There's lots of slow cookers are just underused period in food. Yeah. That's a whole nother discussion.
That's a whole nother
You don't
episode.
have to be fancy either. If cooking is out of your realm of possibility, browse the frozen food section, find whatever you
frozen
can throw together.
Frozen pizzas, whatever. Or just order pizza, whatever.
There is a cookbook called Man Can Microwave, and basically nothing in that involves anything greater than about a 3rd grade reading level and about 15 minutes. Even those without a lot of culinary skill can use the recipes in that book.
Right on. So basically, I just wanted to kind of touch on, encouraging people to make their own, small events, I guess you might call it, and to get everybody together, to spend a an actual full weekend, and not just as teenagers that don't have any other really priorities other than gaming, because we had there were lots of children here. Everybody had a great time, So just to not be so intimidated to make time for your friends to get together and spend an entire weekend gaming.
Although we did have one advantage that many households will not have, and that is the fact that there is a bouncy castle.
Oh yes,
available. So,
having a bounce house makes everything easier with children.
Yeah.
Well, right on. So just good food, good games, good friends. Good times.
Let's talk about the exciting newness of Hillcon this year, the competitive RPG.
Oh, my.
So this is the actual kind of topic we want to set up, and I'm just going to kind of set this up here a little bit. In my past gaming experience, we've ran some competitive gaming, and not competitive where it's one table of gamers competing against each other. It's actually two separate games going on at the same time where they're working at opposite goals. In this one, we did a Cultist versus Investigators
for Call of Cthulhu.
Everybody loves
Well, not
Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu. It was Lovecraftian, but we used World of Darkness as a system, and everybody was mortals. And the Cultists had a few rituals like contact Shub-Niggurath and whatnot. The goals of the Cultists were to summon Shub-Niggurath and basically, of course, bring about the end of the world.
Cultists.
And the goals of the Investigators were simply to figure out what was going on and shut the Cultists down.
I'll tell you what, I was running the Investigators, and I have to say I entered into it with a large amount of trust. I tried something similar many years ago, had nothing but bad experiences with it, and I was highly skeptical and extremely concerned.
So we, to be fair, I think we had ourselves set up for success in a lot of different ways. One, we're all, as mature as you get in gaming and being an adult. Also, two, we all play
expert level adulter, right
a
there.
minimum of fart jokes.
Not adulter or adulter.
Adulting.
We also all are pretty good board gamers, and there's a lot of competitive aspects in board gaming. I think that helps, that you've already, if you're competitive in board gaming, it makes you acclimated, I think, to losing or winning in a way.
Okay, no, in other words, to be able to play the game in the spirit in which it is intended.
Yes, yeah.
And not...
So being okay with losing.
Yes.
Accepting it. As long as you had a good time, that's all that really matters. The other thing we just have good gamers. We have good people that are just interested in having fun and a good story, and it's not necessarily about winning.
Well, people who like something different and new, too.
Right,
right. It's after your first couple of decades of doing tabletop RPs, I was ready to try something different. I've been in a GM slump for a long time, and so it was definitely kind of neat to have to try and maneuver this.
It's such an obvious idea, too. It's one of those things where you're almost, wow, Cultists versus Investigators as a competitive RPG. Why didn't we think of that sooner?
Yeah, it pretty much writes itself. It's got all of the tropes that you know and love.
It worked really well for this kind of event also because we had enough people to split them up into two groups.
Right, so we ended up with two GMs and 3 players at each table. And initially, we didn't plan on how many we were going to have at each table. We built 5 pre-gen characters for each side, and then laid those on the table. And we said, who wants to be an investigator? Who wants to be a cultist? We broke the teams up that way, and then they picked characters from there. Now, I will say that it is critical to do pre-gen characters because, especially in a Lovecraftian setting, you have to make sure certain skill sets are covered, and you also want to have the sides be balanced.
Well, and that's just it. I think a lot of it has to do one, your classic party template. You've got to make sure and have a selection of skills, but because it's not up to one game master to balance it, there's 2 simultaneous sets of things going on, and the asynchronous thing that we had talked about doesn't really work because as the one team is playing, it's got to be synchronous. That is the one thing that I discovered.
Let me back this up a little bit. I think let's talk about before the game starts, managing player expectations. So when a player comes into this, so just so we know, I ran the cultists and Kurt ran the investigators, and Lacey was
I came up with the idea.
Was an investigator
and also may have
contributed in a small way by coming up with the whole idea, but we're going to minimize that and move on.
I had nothing to do with the plot, though. I was not privy ahead of time to any
as far as
plot details.
Managing expectations for the players, I think the first and foremost expectation for the players is that one, it will be fair, that one side won't have any inherent distinct advantage. Now, there are some, along with that, I feel like players go into it expecting that the cultists have an advantage out the gate because they are the bad guys and they get to set the trail for the investigators to follow. But that's an expectation that comes out the gate, and I feel like the players knew that and they're okay with that part of it. Would you agree?
That has to do with the story too, and not specifically like competitive RPGs.
Right.
That's just that particular storyline.
I have some ideas too about how that
inherent.
would be mitigated as well.
Well,
and we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
the other expectations is that there would not be any, for players anyway, that there would not be any glaring holes in their abilities and skill sets, which is managed by us creating the players. Now, when we made the characters, for those of you that are familiar with World of Darkness, they were made as just World of Darkness mortals. So you have so many points to spend across attributes and skills and backgrounds. And then we didn't spend their freebie points. So we had some level of customization that the players had access to put their own little tweaks on things. Because I don't mind pre-gens, but at least for me, I like to be able to add my own little twist to it.
I thought it was a really nice compromise because spending those freebie points takes almost no time at all.
That's true.
And it adds just enough little flavor that you can throw into your character to take it from being just a straight pre-gen to making it, okay, this is my character.
Well, and as well, we have Lee, who is an investigator. Lee likes to put a lot of thought into where he spends his points, so then it also shortens the amount of time for players that are more analytical about where they spend things to just get, it shortens that time so that everybody spends those points quickly, and then boom, you're right into the gaming.
Well, I think it's also critical to mention that this was a one-shot. So if you didn't get it right out of the gate, there was no chance, there's no opportunity to go back and fix things.
Right.
So especially for people who are more analytical, this has got to be good. We have to hit the ground with the wheels spinning.
Well, that's something else too. You talk about pre-gen characters and being a one-shot. One of the expectations that we set at the beginning of the game was, I said, this is a one-shot. It's Lovecraftian. Drive these characters like they're a rental.
Yeah.
So burn them up, shoot them up, kill them down, knock them down.
We're not in this for the long haul. You're in this to save the world
and have fun. Yeah.
And I think we touched on it, but maybe didn't quite hit it enough when you're setting up the expectations for the players, for them to understand more than it's just competitive. One team is going to lose.
Right.
And it's not like you're going to lose a little or you're going to win a little. The expectation is that one team is going to lose completely.
Right.
And then that's it. Game over since it's a one shot.
Right.
So, as long as everybody knows that going into it and is emotionally prepared for that.
and I feel like
you put a certain amount of investment in a character, especially like you're saying, it's not just a pre-gen. You're adding a little bit of customization. You're asking people to step into that role
and more importantly,
be willing to accept the fate that will happen to them.
Even if you're not super competitive, everyone wants to win.
Yeah.
And if you go into it knowing that, hey, there's a chance I'm going to lose, I feel like that changes your mindset. If knowing that that's a possibility out the gate, it changes things. So I think, are there any other player expectations that you can think of that we set out at the beginning to manage?
Well, that you're going to, both game masters are, I'm running the investigators, but I am not rooting for the investigators.
Yeah, I think it goes on with the fairness thing, James being fair.
Very, you have to, and also too, the game masters need to agree amongst themselves. We are going to be as neutral as humanly possible because otherwise it's no fun.
Right. I think that's just a thing of being an experienced game master because regardless of
whether... Good to mention it, though.
Yeah, I agree.
You may know that the exits are both in front and behind you every time you get on the plane, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't say it again just in case.
True.
Yeah.
So any other player expectations you can think of, Lacey?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up.
So game master expectations, I think there's some that you have to manage, especially if you haven't done this before. So in my gaming experience, I had been involved both running and playing this kind of a thing a handful of times. So we'll say between 4 and 6 times, I've been involved with this. Right. So there were some things that gave me an advantage, at least in setting it up and planning it, to know there were certain pitfalls that we had in the past. And Kurt was very apprehensive, but I managed, through my winning personality to coerce or convince him, a little 50-50 there, into doing it. And I just to sum it, like, would you say that you had a good time?
Yes. I say that I was a fair amount of emotional capital in the sense that I was, there are a few things that are worse for me than having the game fail.
Right.
Okay. I feel that I've not only let myself down, but then I've wasted everyone else
time
at the table, which is just, it's almost unforgivable.
Right.
And so this was, it was neat, but not knowing, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
Because obviously, what do players do? They break your plot.
Right.
That's their job. You come up with a plot, the players break it using creativity and all of other sort of stuff.
Right.
And so having to coordinate between the two tables was not impossible. And it was kind of fun, but at the same time, we had to have these moments. Okay, pause. We have to go and reconcile.
Well, I guess that's another player expectation we laid out at the beginning, was to say that there are going to become times in this game where we're going to stop, and the two game masters are going to reconvene and say, this is what happened. Kind of update each other so that we're all on the same page, and that the players knew that was going to happen. And then, hey, if you need to go use the bathroom, if you need another beer, or whatever it is that you need, more snacks.
As a player, I thought that was fantastic because like you said, when you have a group of people, it's not like at a regular con where they're paying to be there, so they need to make sure they get their money's worth out of it. You can like, oh well, I need a sip of water and I need to go get a snack. I need to pee. And once you have 8 people around the table, then it's like somebody's always missing. But here, like, everybody sat down and they waited till you guys had to take a break, and then we would go do whatever we needed to do.
The total game time was about 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Was it that long?
Yes, it was, surprisingly enough. And we had, I want to say, probably a break every hour. Like there was a couple points where we had like a brief 2-minute discussion and then right back into it, which that was almost
we didn't have to
not like a pause.
There were about 2 actual larger breaks,
which were about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And that was both for the game masters to get something to drink or whatever, and to talk about what was going on.
How do we keep this together? Yeah,
that was both I guess that would be both a GM expectation and a player expectation, so that everybody knew. I guess one of my big
other players at our table.
One of the big expectations that I set out for Kurt when we talked about doing this was to just have some faith in our players, and if they knew what was going to happen, we have good players.
Yes,
and that to just give it a shot. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't give people enough credit. Sometimes we're real reluctant to try. I feel like if you lay things out for people and say, this is what we're going to do, they're much easier than if you just sort of let them stumble into it. You know what I mean?
You're right. No, I was open for the experience, and I definitely found it. I found it in a sense almost more exciting because I'm not in competition with James, but I'm trying to make sure that the plot items that I'm throwing out there aren't going to obviously conflict with something he's doing. And we had like the Facebook chat or instant message open.
So that's a good thing to mention, is that in the past when I had done this was before all that stuff was really easily available. Yeah. So, we managed it just by strictly getting together at those breaks. But for us, we were messaging back and forth a little bit to say, hey, this happened, this happened, this happened. Especially it worked well in an investigative game, because I could say, we already had some scenes that were laid out, and it was like, this is already missing. They did this by this MO, whatever it was.
They decided to not go there for like the complete obvious choice of stealing the artifacts to perform the ritual. They decided not to do that.
Right. Well, I think we'll talk about some of the specific things that we laid out scene-wise when we get to setting things up for success. But are there any other expectations that you guys can think of?
That there may be some minor, I don't want to call it retcons that you have to do.
Right, yeah.
We may have to tweak a few things as we go.
Yeah, telling players that there may have to be some hand-wavium.
To make everything work together, and we'll make it as fair, and just trust the GMs that we're going to make it as fair as possible.
Right. Yeah. Well, something else that you just said
I think GM expectation-wise, just flexibility in general on your part. Even if the players aren't seeing it, you guys have to be prepared to, make a slightly different decision than you had originally intended.
Mm-hmm.
And for GM expectations as well, another day of planning. Now that I know what I don't know, another day of planning. 3 to 4 hours for 3 to 4 hours is, plus time outside. Now that I see what I need to do,
I will agree. That was one of our pitfalls that we had. We'll talk about was our planning, and we can kind of get into that more in a minute. But something that I want to talk about that I just thought of now when you were talking about GM burnout and that kind of stuff, and like this for me was very exciting as a game master. It was a lot of fun, and it was, more importantly than being fun, I found it challenging in an inspiring way.
I was actually playing, I don't want to say against someone, but in the sense that there was a collaborative thing going on that made it more exciting in essence to me as well.
It's almost, although it's cooperative, it's almost a little competitive for you guys too, because now you're competing on a GM level to make sure that the game that you're providing is just as good as the game the other GM is. You know what I mean? Like it's not competitive in I win and you lose sense, but there's still that element of trying to step up your game.
If you're playing in a symphony, you're not playing against, like, the trumpets aren't playing against the violins, but everybody wants to play very well.
Yes.
Would that be fair to say?
I don't want my table to suck.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so I found it very exhilarating in that kind of a way, and challenging and inspiring in a way that I feel like I haven't had in a while in gaming. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, and that's because there was actually someone to conspire with, and that's the other thing is that normally you're on your own. GM's usually on your own, and you're coming up with it. It's not a bad thing, but it was really exciting to have someone, in essence, to play with.
Right, and there's also, this is the only.
So many things I could do better next time.
Well, this is the only way that you can get this experience, though.
But now you've gone from I will never do that again to what am I going to do next time?
I'm the first one to admit that I am wrong more frequently than I am right, and I am willing to change my mind. So
right.
Can we talk about, I don't know what our next bullet point is supposed to be, but some surprising things that happened? Things that you weren't expecting?
I think we'll hit those highlights of it at the very end.
Okay.
So let's talk about how we set this up for success. This is not a game that you can improvise, but there is a lot of improvisation that happens in the game because, like Lacey said, you have to be flexible. So what me and Kurt did is, in going with the paradigm of cultists versus investigators, there's a very specific thing that the way this happens. If you just think about your average Lovecraftian game, it starts off with cultists doing something, right? And then the investigators start on the trail. Now, one of the things that we had to set up to make sure it happened is that the cultists could always stay a little bit ahead of the investigators so that we could build to our big climax.
And this is where we actually ran into a deep philosophical difference, and it was a very difficult sell to have me do because I felt like in essence I was going to be lying.
But yeah, I think that's a topic.
We can touch on that another time.
We are definitely going to come back to that. But specifically in this one, we kind of, Kurt conceded to me and said, right, let's just make sure we work it towards the climax so we have our epic climax happen. And I don't want to get caught up in the details of that because that's a great episode, and I think that's a full episode in and of itself. We'll just suffice to say for this game specifically, we went with making sure we made it to our climax. We set the scenes that we built a ritual that the cultists had to complete. Okay, in order to complete a ritual, Lovecraftian stuff, there's a lot of components and tools you have to have. Mm-hmm. So we built those things: sacrificial knife of ancient evilness,
spell components, for lack of a better term, spell components.
And there was a Shoggoth sacrifice, and all these. There was like 4 or 5 components they had to have to get. So knowing that, then it doesn't matter what order necessarily you do these in, but you have to have these pieces to the puzzle. Those were scenes that were built for the cultists to just figure out how to get this stuff. And we made sure that, like, this is how I would do it or whatever. But we had some ideas of how they would go about getting these things. So it wasn't just blind faith of, this is how it's going to happen. They'll just figure it out. This is what they need. We had like a
subway map of the town.
Basically,
that had locations and the resources that they would need.
The path they had to take to get those things. Yeah. What the messenger made helpful was Kurt knew the pieces they had to get, so when they didn't get the items in the order we thought they would. So then I texted Kurt on Facebook Messenger to say, hey, they have the barrel of wax. They have these items, and he already knew where they were and what would happen
when they were gotten.
Right. Yeah. And I gave him a brief thing of this is how he did it. Just like a 1-sentence thing. So I wasn't getting caught up in the messenger. I was still staying focused on the players. That's one thing you really felt like I wanted to manage this time was I did not want to get focused on the technology. I wanted to stay focused on my players.
Yeah. And I think the bullet point thing was what worked for us back and forth. Okay, Wax acquired one factory worker in the story was mutilated and taken with. And so when they show up, I built this thing about what happened off of a single sentence that he sent me. A lot of it was flavor text in essence on the side just to add to the drama and the thing, and wouldn't affect what the cultists were doing, but it really kind of, I want to say, tried to build the horror of what was going on.
I think that's where the improvisation comes in, because all I sent Kurt was that they got the barrel of wax at this point and that they killed and took the body with them, and that's all. Killed a worker and took the body with them with a machete. And then it didn't matter. Kurt embellished that however he wanted, and that was okay because the climax. The investigators aren't going to be asking the cultists, "Why did you not use a gun?" or what? It was.
So off of those 2 sentences, we ended up with a brutally murdered man that was taken away with some guy cultist apparently. I mean, we didn't know that at the time. very nervous and agitated factory worker and a completely hysterical woman who needed an ambulance.
Yeah, and of course,
and then we're trying to get information out of those two not very helpful individuals.
It was a traumatic evening for them.
It was.
So basically, a lot of those scenes were improvised, I guess you might say. Would that be fair to say? But we knew what the scene was going to be, but the details were improvised. And that was something that I think both the game masters had to go into it knowing is that you have to be flexible. Now, I think there's two kinds of flexibility involved in this. The flexibility for the investigators is being able to adapt the scene and keep it interesting and drop clues. The improvisation by the cultist GM was more, how do I push them along and make sure that we've got things moving and making that aspect of it. Does that seem...
Did you have to put in any considerations about how to slow either group down at any point?
No. So that's something to definitely just focus on, is that we had to make sure, and we knew this out the gate, that the cultists are who set the game off. So when both games in real world start at the same time, there's nothing for the investigators to do at the beginning. So how did you handle that?
So I tried to handle it with setup, like the ritual knife and the bag full of the bad mojo arriving at the museum. The introduction of the characters. We had one of the NPCs who could have been a PC, and I didn't know who was chosen, who was a sheriff's deputy who was on suspension. I went through that little scene about how that sheriff's deputy gets suspended and calling Lacey's character in to, as the chief and playing the NPC. Well, Bob got suspended for being a bad guy, and I'm going to have you take up some extra shifts.
Oh, right on.
And that classic, oh my God.
There's a part where I see his file and I kind of, spied to figure out exactly what it was and set him over the edge. And
just so everyone listening knows, me and Kurt really haven't debriefed each other very well about what happened. So there's a lot of this that we're both finding out right now real time. And so there might be some that was awesome moments.
And so I'm trying to set up each of the cultist NPCs because these people live in a small town. They know everybody. They're all about the same age. And so she went to Lacey's character went to high school with the bad guy, the bad guy sheriff's deputy who's been suspended, who's always been a loner, always been an outsider, who has violent tendencies, who, she's known since she was 15 years old as a jerk.
So
And then there was the introducing of the artifacts at the museum. So
there were also, I remember you talking about...
some of the NPCs on both sides there and get introduced to them and kind of...
Right. I guess that's one of the things we had to make sure to manage was to try and keep the two groups of players physically apart too much so that there wasn't...
See, and this is one thing where I think it worked out. I honestly didn't.
Brief encounters aren't so much of a big deal, but in this game it wouldn't matter because at the climax of it, whether what Eustace said would be in the character of Dave's voice when he was playing him versus your voice doesn't matter because it's a big shootout, complete the ritual, or kill the cultist thing. It doesn't matter there. But in a more political game or social game, it might be. So in this instance, it doesn't affect too much, but in the other one, it could.
But see, I think it does. I knew who those NPCs or PCs were on the cultist side, and I felt that in order to keep this from coming right out of the blue, I needed to get... I think I jammed 4 of the cultist characters you guys actually ran into pre all of the big thing. I knew what they had to do. They had to be in locations. Mm-hmm. And if they ran into them, like when they went to the dump, they ran into the guy that ran the dump.
I think that's interesting from the investigator's side, too, because you reach the end and you see all of these people that you saw before, and you're like, oh, if I had only known right then, I could have stopped the whole thing.
It's almost like, I think it's dramatic irony.
So we see, we see one of the cultists at the museum's introduction of the artifacts, so and then later she's gone.
Just
and
to clarify,
gone.
The two different groups didn't know what the characters were that were available to play. So the players playing cultists did not know the investigators that were available, and the investigators didn't know the cultists that were available. So that's how this confusion kind of happened. And we kind of built some of that in, not with the characters, but with a scene where they drove past one another on their highway and didn't realize it.
Total throwaway line, and everybody on my side, they just ignored it.
Right.
They got lights and sirens, and they're heading towards the state park. And I talked about a moment where the chief who is in the car, almost hits a city garbage truck as he goes by. He's moving so fast. Well, James and I know that garbage truck has the shoggoth, and like half of the cultist team, and they're driving the opposite direction down the street.
So we talked about planning and making sure we had the cultists we set up that we know the breadcrumbs that they're going to leave. Yeah. And communicating that way. The other thing that I think that we did was we kind of briefly touched on is managing the pacing. Now, the cultists move along very fast because that's just the nature of things. When you're playing an evil cultist, you're not bound by the same sense of right and decency. So when you need the barrel of whatever, if you can't just go pick it up, well, you just go machete the guy and take it anyway. So I did not, at least on my part, managing that, I kept them moving, and I know it was moving fast, but I also wanted that to happen because I knew what happened at my table is what sparked action at the investigators' table. So I made a conscious effort to, I don't want to say push them because they were already moving fast as it was, but to make sure that they were always moving forward.
Okay.
Not pushing, but just making sure we're moving forward.
Did there have to be any effort on your part to make sure that we stayed caught up enough for it to be competitive?
Absolutely not, because everything that happened in a public place, not in a public place, but with witnesses. So every time they robbed a location, because we had to have that sheriff's deputy there. You got a call over the radio. Hey, we need ambulance and all units to respond to the candle factory because somebody just got murdered. Well, that means that, because it's happening in a populated location, I don't need to rely on you stumbling across it. Every time they pop something, you can respond.
That was the important part.
I don't think it's necessarily a stipulation that you would need to have the sheriff's deputy to do that. I do think it would be easier for you, but I think you could accomplish the same thing with the paramedic if you had the right character playing it, or there was a war vet character. And the game is set in 1985, so all of that traffic comes over on a CB radio and is easily accessible to anybody. So if you have one conspiracy nut, that is predicting the end of the world anyway and has a CB radio, you can still accomplish
out
that.
There with his scanner of the 800 radio. Yeah, that's all broadcast. That's something else that I guess we set this up in 1985 so that there's some things that we don't have to deal with as game masters, high def satellites and all this kind of stuff that would make it too easy for the investigators to just be like, oh, it's them. We got it on high def satellite.
We're looking at it right now as it's happening.
In real time. Yeah. So there were some concessions we had to make to back it up to a time that would make it more interesting. Kind of like how Rob Zombie talks about he doesn't like to make modern horror movies. He likes to set them in a time before cell phones. So it's kind of the similar
like what they
idea.
Did with the first season of True Detective.
Right.
Yeah.
So are there any other things that you can think of that we set ourselves up for success? I think we should have done some more planning. Because we put this together as a concept. Me and Kurt sat down and talked about 30 minutes, 45 minutes initially, and then
slept on it, and then came back.
And then came back the day of the game, about 3 hours before the game. Sat down and spent about an hour to an hour and a half and put it together. Now, and also though, we are both experienced Lovecraftian game masters, so there's that. So there's like some conventions and we've both played together for a long time, so we both know tendencies we have.
You know the mythos, you know the tropes,
right? And I also have
experienced
you've been
in a game master
for nearly
capacity.
A decade.
There's
I can be pretty sure
and
what
you have a big
whip
advantage in knowing not only knowing each other but knowing the players very well.
That's true. And also we kind of when we decided to do this, we talked about. Did you have a desire to run the cultists or no?
I didn't care. See, my big worry was because I've never done it before, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Okay.
So, am I missing something in the planning stage that's going to make it impossible for me to make this a good experience for the players?
So, like for me, I knew from playing in your games, I think that in my experience that you do a better job running investigators. It's just you do a tremendous job at that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, actually, like when I came up with the idea and I talked to James about it, I said, I want to run this game with Kurt, and then James ended up running the game, which ended up better, anyways. But
the only reason I suggested I didn't, and I wasn't to try and steal your thunder, it's because I know having done this before, I had experience in it, and I was like, I feel like if the first time we do it as a group, I would rather have so that I know some of the pitfalls and some of the ways to adapt the situation to make sure we kind of succeed.
All I'm trying to say is I knew out the gate that Kurt needed to be the other half of the operation.
Right.
Because he runs Cthulhu Mythos investigation games very well. They're some of my favorite games that he runs, just investigation games in general.
So I think one of the ways to make sure you set yourself up for success is to pick genres and styles of game that both of you are familiar with, and both of you enjoy running.
Like we wouldn't do this with the Made RPG right out of the.
It always comes
gate.
back to Made.
It just wouldn't work.
Right.
East versus West, Made.
So, is there anything else you can think of, or that along choosing game masters?
Just that it's one of those things where the relationship between game masters has got to work, because that's where it's going to make it sink or swim.
Okay, I would agree with that very much. Yeah. Lacey, anything else you think of there?
It's got to be their strongest.
Okay, so let's kind of hit on some common pitfalls. And I think the first and biggest pitfall is that everybody, and it kind of goes back to expectations, is you have to set everybody up on the tracks that says we're going to compete each other, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, and everyone has to be okay with that. And if someone's not okay with that, that's fine. They don't, maybe they shouldn't participate in it, or maybe we should just do something else.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Know your players. That's
right.
What I forget who said that all the time, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the first and foremost thing, is to not be, one, to not be afraid to do it, but also not be afraid that if this just is not going to work for us, don't do it then. But I would highly recommend to just err on the side of trying it, because if you set people up to say, this is the expectations we're going to do, I think people will surprise you.
Okay, so the pitfall that I ran into was time. I am used to taking things at a certain pace. I have a certain more sort of genteel pace that I prefer to run these things at. And once I realized how fast they were running on the other side, I was like, okay, so no, we need to shift. I'm downshifting, and I'm like, we're going to put the hammer down on this. And I'll tell you what, I was a few moments, I was almost panicked, because I'm like, I've got to keep this plot moving along. And at one point, Kalen was sitting across from me, and he was being indecisive. And I just looked at him and said, you have to make a decision right now. And he sat back in his chair a little bit. He's like, I do this. And you could tell it was, I was like, no, you cannot sit here and think about it for 2 hours.
So I think
I've got plot to move along.
Right. So pushing action and making sure that things are moving along, because if both tables aren't moving along, one table lags behind, and then they've fallen so far behind that they really catch up. So to make sure that you're staying in communication, you're taking those breaks to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that everyone is moving in the right, maybe not in the right direction, but at least they're moving.
Well, it's just that if they make wrong decisions, that's not on me.
Right.
The point is that they need to make sure that they have that is taking place in a timely fashion, in a real time.
Is there any point where a decision was made and you guys came up with different answers on either side of the table?
I don't
and
really
then
know,
had
to be honest.
adapt?
But that's one of the things that. So
the spear and the medicine bag.
Okay, I think we'll come back to that.
Fiasco.
We'll come back to that in about 2 seconds. But what I want to say is that I'm sure there are things that I said at my table about scenes and things that were going on that did not match what Kurt had said. But
plot points,
right,
things that matter.
Right. So that's the thing is, the one thing is to make sure that you focus on, there are things in the plot that matter and things that don't. And the things that don't matter, it doesn't matter if they don't match up exactly. It's okay. Because no one's going to find out. But so in our situation, there were two components that had to be gotten. There was a medicine bag and a sacrificial dagger, and they were both held at a university museum. So the cultists who I was running had gotten there, and we had set it up that they were going to use the custodian that worked there that had been a character to go steal them, when in fact that's not at all what they did. They went there, legitimately filed paperwork to use them in a demonstration, and was like, hey, I legitimately could feasibly pull this off, and they did. So I said, fine, it happens.
And then on the investigator side, the professor that Kalen was playing never let the objects out of his sight. He was standing next to them, quite literally, from the moment in the plot that they walked into the building. And when I sent the message to James, they're taking the items. He says, they've already got them now. And we're like, so how do we make this work?
We immediately paused the game and came together. Now, I have to be honest, this is just dumb luck that it worked out. There were two items there. So what we did was, I said, well, the only way we do this without just retconning things, which I don't mind retconning things, but it's
I don't
hard.
Like doing it if I have to.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it breaks the internal world.
Right. So the solution we came up with is that at museums, when things are being repaired, they have fake versions of them that look very similar. Yeah, replicas. So what we said is, I just said, hey, what if your guys have one good one and one replica, and the cultists have one good one and replica, and hey, Bob's your uncle, nobody knows.
And just through sheer incompetence, when they were in the office getting the display set up, they put one and one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's high stress, it's all good, and it was good. And then we also didn't tell the players right away that, which was a great moment at the climax, and they were like, oh, wait a second.
Well, you didn't tell your players right away.
Right.
We knew as soon as we had the objects.
Right.
Because the professor looked at it, and one says, he looks at it and he goes, well, this has the correct provenance tag on it. This one is obviously a replica because he's a professor of something.
But it doesn't make as significant a difference for us as it does for the people trying to
using
complete the ritual.
Yeah.
So that was the one way where I feel like we had a major obstacle that came up, and then we just found a solution and rolled with it. Now, granted, it happened to be just through dumb luck that it was an easy solution. So had it been a different situation, I'm not sure what we would have came up with. But
I think even if there had been one item, it's still possible to change it around and say, okay, well, this was really a replica the entire time, and they had already signed out the artifact before the presentation was ever. It's simple to come up with some sort of storytelling solution. I think the important thing is, as soon as it came up, you guys got together, discussed how you were going to overcome the obstacle, and then
we
took it
thought
back
on
to
our
the table.
feet. And we move forward. And I think that's the big important part is we didn't get hung up on it. It was like, oh, no, this happened. Well, how do we fix it? Find the solution and go.
It actually turned into a wonderful dramatic point at the end that resulted in the professor being killed. But he didn't really see that coming. Right. But at the same time, it was wonderful. So, what a way to go.
Now, let me ask this. Lacey, since you were playing it, when we had that moment, and like I was sitting at our table, I looked at it and I said, oh, no. I said, we have to pause, and I have to take 2 minutes to talk to Kurt. And then we met halfway between at the stairs. Did that add tension for you as a player?
Yeah, because I had no idea what you guys were talking about. Because Kurt had basically the exact same reaction. Looks as, oh no, hold on a second, guys, and then he leaves, and I'm like, oh God, what is going to happen right now?
What doom is waiting for us?
My message, James, was this just broke. We need to meet.
Right. So I think because that's a good point to put on. Is there some meta things that can happen that can add a lot of tension and fun to it? Would you agree? Because there's that moment of like, it's so, oh my God, this happened. I've got to go meet with the other GM, and then pause and so what happened at the table when he walked away?
I don't know that I would call it like meta, because there's such a negative connotation to that, but just real world things that added tension to it.
What was because I didn't see it at our table. What happened when we were both gone?
Actually, there were some tense moments, but then we kind of continued to just stay in character and role play our scene. And I was like, okay, so Kaylin, I'm going to have you look at these things. Okay. And, so Dr. Pat, take a look at this and tell me what you think. So we continued to role play, but it added tension to the actual players themselves. Right, you know what I'm saying? So
I wondered, I think
because I didn't want to just stop the game.
Right.
And,
because I wanted to see, it would have been interesting to see, because I think at least at my table, they stopped for a minute and they were like, oh, what the heck is going on?
We had a few seconds of what is happening here, but then we were right back in character.
Well, that's a cool thing too, because I think, there's nothing wrong with playing on expectations and using real world things to add tension to it, because it makes it more exciting, Yeah.
So were there any other pitfalls along the way?
I said just the pacing, and I think I've got some ideas that might help that.
Okay, so when you say that, just can be a little more specific. So what problem did you have specifically with the pacing?
For one, I needed something to, like, for instance, instead of being completely reactionary, if I had to do it over again, I would have the cultists doing something that's not exactly directly related to the end game for this episode, but something that would bring the investigators together initially. Like, they're just doing regular cultist type thing, kidnappings, cattle mutilations, crop circles, and you just happen to be there investigating the most recent crop circle by these cultists, when the cultists decide, you know what, maybe we should just end the world.
That's easily
it's so you're saying this is set in a small town, everybody knows everybody else. It's not reasonable to think that the cultists only got together for this one giant ritual and you knew nothing about them ahead of time.
See, the thing is like, for the way I set up the cultist was at the beginning, they had already existed as a cult, but they knew I kind of told them that there was this tension in the air, and that they knew they felt like there was a great moment coming. So they casted a contact Shub-Niggurath ritual where they got to speak and have visions and that kind of stuff, and that's what set them on the ritual. It's not that they had it planned; it was delivered to them in a message from their.
My normal method of operation is that I would maybe not map out every single person in the town, but I would put together 1 or 2 sentence character dossiers for probably 50 people who live in that town. Now, only 5 of them are going to be cultists or whatever it is at the other table, so you don't know who the cultists are going to be, but here's the 30 people that you know in town, and set that up ahead of time. Give the investigators, both the investigators and the cultists, because the same thing with the cultists, they're not going to know who the investigators are going to be.
I don't think the cultists care, because so at your guys' table, I know there's a lot more going on with the regular world. With the cultists, it doesn't matter to them. They have a single-minded vision with blinders on that I have to get X amount of things to complete X ritual at X time. Nothing else matters.
Okay.
So like everything that they ran into.
I can see that, but at the same time, having a feel for the social structure of the town and who's who in the town adds ways that they can get those items in a more mundane fashion. So like you don't always want to just start murdering people, because then the police are hot on your tail. Well, if you can get them through social manipulation instead, then that's something to consider.
There was a little, like the ritual got moved up with, there was a school teacher and they moved the field trip up, and that was done through mundane means. But essentially that was the only way. But I wouldn't have to have, it's already assumed that there's a principal or a superintendent in the town. I wouldn't have to have a dossier for that character. I could, it's just assumed he's there.
I would say that adding that level of depth might slow down the game considerably also. So if you're looking for a one-shot game, it's almost better to have it be a little more superficial.
The other thing, though, is if you know it's going to be a one-shot, do you really want to invest the amount of time it takes to build 50 NPCs with sentences in a world? If it's going to be a 4-hour one-shot,
I would say depend. If it's me doing it and we've got the time and efforts of, let's say, between 6 and 8 or 12 players, I'd do it just for the simple fact that even if I don't use it again, I've got that filled in my mind the way the world is working, and chances are if we try this again, it's going to be over several sessions. And I think it's better for consistency if that stuff is known ahead of time. That way we don't have to invent people on the fly. We have those 30 NPCs who define the world.
Right. The only thing is, though, is I feel like to keep the worlds consistent between each other, they have to be more minor than a normal minor NPC would be, because there's so much stuff that's going to happen at one table that's not going to be known at the other table, and you want to try and keep it as internally consistent as you can, because everybody can see there's going to be some hand waving going on.
Yeah.
But to try and minimize as much of it as you can, there you have to strike a balance between the two. Is what I guess.
Why I said 1 or 2 sentence dossiers. Like for my regular tabletop RP stuff, if I'm going to come up with a dossier for an NPC, the players get 3 sentences, I might have 200 words.
Right.
Okay. Just so I know where this person's
But I think that's
from.
also an exception rather than the rule, because I don't think most...
I still think the main difference is going to be your focus on how long the game is going to be. Yeah. So you build complexity to suit the amount of time you're going to be spending in that setting.
Well, the thing is no one wants to spend 45 hours to play a 2-hour game. 45 hours of prep.
No, that's reducing it to absurdity. I mean, it's you're probably going to put in twice as much time for prep if you do it right than you are to play. So,
all right. Well, are there any other pitfalls that you can think of? Okay. Well, I think to kind of summarize them is the number one pitfall, I think, is making sure that you have yourself set up for success with your players' expectations.
Yeah.
And telling them, hey, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and that kind of a thing. And managing that out the gate and telling everyone, hey, it doesn't matter, as we're just trying to have a good time, and going at it from that angle as opposed to a win, lose, or succeed, fail angle.
So to summarize the summary,
it's a double summarization. Is that right? Can we do that?
So
set realistic expectations, be flexible, and communicate well.
Rule number 1: don't be a dick. So what about highlights? Are there any specific highlights that you guys can think of, without getting into too deep into a gaming story, but things that happened that you were like, this is so awesome, that could be awesome in any competitive kind of game like this?
No. Mine kind of went somewhere else. I had one I wanted to say earlier. I should have written it down.
I was too worried about trying to make sure everything was working. I honestly don't remember a heck of a lot, and because I was too concerned about making sure that
Well, maybe just like phrase it a different way. Was there anything that surprised you, something that happened that you didn't intend on and didn't realize was going to happen, but you were pleasantly surprised with?
Well, one thing that helped move our plot along was you discovered the identity of one of the cultists and went to their trailer. Okay? And what occultists do, for some reason, on the wall, they always map it out for you. Okay, maybe not completely or clearly, but there's always clippings and magazine pages and maps with red circles on them, and that really gets things moving. I appreciated that. I didn't know that was going to happen, but yeah. And you showed the right amount of trepidation about kicking in a door, too. You're a police officer. You don't just kick in doors. But when you saw, like, all the really super creepy stuff, the paramedic arrived, you invented a medical reason for going in to check on the person who was there, and it was
just the right amount of police corruption without being over the top. So there were a couple of surprising things that happened from the player perspective that I thought were pretty awesome. The first being the sense of urgency that was created. So I know that there is another group of role players that I am competing against that are trying to summon some sort of evil creature. So now it's not just like this thing that's going to happen and you're going to give me the plot points, I'm going to investigate, and I'm going to get to the climax when I get there because that's how the game is set up. I am actively competing against this other team, and regardless of how fast I go, they're going to get to the end as fast as they're going to get there. So there's this sense of urgency that you don't see in the regular tabletop game.
Well, I agree very much with that. And when I went upstairs to where you guys were, and I stopped you guys from it, I could see the urgency on all of your faces because, one, I only came upstairs to your table one time where we didn't meet just separate from everyone.
Yeah.
And I whispered some things, to you or whatever. But like when I came up there, everyone's eyes were on me. And I could see the wonder in your faces of, is this good or bad for us? I know this has to be bad because he's up here. And that sense of like, it was I could just tell that you guys felt the need to go,
Well, there was even during character creation because There's a member in our group that likes to put a lot of thought into character creations. One of his favorite parts of the game is creating a character. So I'm almost like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? They may already be gaming downstairs. Hurry up and just write some dots on your sheet and let's get this thing done.
Well, that's something I actually use that to my advantage. I knew Lee would be more deliberate in his character creation, so I took that time to get the cultists going so that we could deliver the first clue faster. It wasn't intended when we did it, but I knew the players again, and I knew that what we were doing would set you guys into motion. So I deliberately got them to spend their points quickly so that we could get our ball rolling to help the investigators get their story going upstairs. So it kind of comes back to knowing your characters and whatnot. But
so just joining us at the table now, we have Carrie, and she was in the cultist group, whereas I was in the investigator group. So we're going to get some of her player perspective also on what was going on. So I was just talking about the urgency on our side of the table, knowing that you guys are going to be summoning the big bad thing at any moment, and how that's pushing us forward and pushing us to move faster to try and catch up, basically, with you guys.
Yeah, we were gathering tools, and I kept thinking, I know there's a group of people out there trying to stop us, but we got the Elder God on our side, and I probably shouldn't act on that knowledge. We were a little reckless.
Well, I think being cultist just makes you reckless a little bit.
Reckless, yeah,
it's kind of built into it. So is there anything when we were playing, is there anything that surprised you or anything that was like, this was a great moment?
How excited everybody was when we all met up was really exciting.
Like for the climax?
At the climax.
Yeah. So at the end of the game, we had a big climax where the ritual's happening and the investigators come to stop it. And everybody... I didn't even think about that, but when everybody came down here, it was like this.
There was tension.
There
was palpable tension.
It was like if you imagine like an MMA fight or a boxing fight, when both of the guys come together and they touch gloves before the fight starts. It's like it's about to be on, and we're going to do this thing. There was very much so. And
I kind of like wanted to stop that moment just so they could know who we were, because I know we didn't run into any of the investigators, but I had a feeling that Kurt had put us into his game, and so I was like, I want them to know that I am an elementary school teacher up here.
I think that's
Well,
a
we
that's a
mentioned
good
it.
point
We
too,
mentioned it,
because
so.
I didn't know who Haley was supposed to be at all, and I had no idea. There was some confusion about who Eustace was and about who Dave was, and then they didn't know who I was talking about. So it was, I think.
So maybe just a brief moment at the climax to
Name tags.
No, like a brief moment to describe who all were seen and in what capacity we had already seen them and that sort of thing, so that everybody is together on that. So
Right.
that
See, I
kind of
might
something we
use
just thought
like,
about right
hello,
now.
my
but-
name is tags. You know, cultist Bob might be a good, good. Oh, it's you, and then
Well, I think if we had just stopped for a minute and like I think we were so, even as game masters, I feel like I was so caught up in the moment of the excitement of it.
Well,
to
yeah,
push
and at the
things
time,
along.
I just wanted to like, okay, we've got to let's shoot them all.
Yeah,
Right.
and I really needed to hurry up and summon Show.
Being cognizant of how excited you are managing that to make sure that you're doing the best that you can, So
I think mapping out that final showdown is probably a better thing to do. Like, have an actual map of the terrain, what's going on, because there was a fair amount of where is everybody.
I would agree with that also.
In World, the system we use also isn't exactly designed to be the most crunchy. I mean, it's kind of crunchy, but it's not in that a 5-foot step doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So it's there's some flexibility
That's a
there.
prejudice that you have. I tell you all the time, miniatures can be used in any game
I
as
agree.
can maps. That's just some kind of nonsense thing that you have. I don't know what your deal is, but it's always helpful to see the picture when it comes to that
I think
kind
it's
of
just
thing.
because when I play World of Darkness, I think of it more as a narrative, somewhere between a narrative combat and a crunchy combat. But
Except when you're fighting cultists around an open pit with Shoggoths and all
Well,
that. It's
you know.
important to know where everyone is.
all right, so if you can hear it in the background, there's a couple angry children upstairs, so you may hear them in the background, you may not, but sorry if you do. Hopefully it's not too loud. Anything else that you found surprising or exhilarating, Carrie?
Would you do it again?
I have one more.
What's that?
The amount of cooperation and teamwork happening within our little group was significantly better than in a regular tabletop too. So I guess, so when we've done investigation things in the past, it's always like, what can my character do to affect this moment? And it's almost like kind of like you're waiting for your turn to be able to be useful. There was more, there was just more role playing. There was more social role playing happening between the characters, and we were more cooperative because it wasn't us versus them. It was so much more of a team thing than an individual thing.
Did you guys divide up the labor, the work?
I think it was divided up better than normal, and that was pretty much it. I just thought that there was more teamwork amongst the role
We did
players.
a lot of planning too. Like in our group, we knew what we needed to do. We knew who would be better at it. We thought we knew who should go do it, and we tried to like fit everybody to the jobs. But we spent a significant amount of time actually planning out what we were doing before we went up to you and said, "Hey, we need to go do this.
Right.
Please facilitate."
So the same thing. There was more social role playing happening between the dice mechanic than you might normally see.
I
at the
would
table.
say, though, there was a lot more planning, but it was not analysis paralysis. It was all, this is the idea we're going to do, we're going to move forward with it, and this is how we're going to do it. There wasn't, once you guys decided on an idea, it was like, how do we make this happen? You know what I mean?
And some of that too might have been the urgency.
That's
so
true.
You're
That's
doing
the
that
biggest
planning,
thing.
but you have that always pushing you.
The biggest thing that I keep hearing is the urgency, because in investigative games, it does seem like there's this tendency to just not drag, but get caught up in the details and do we have every last piece, instead of being like, we've got to stop the problem right now or start the problem.
Didn't know that they weren't going to be able to find us.
Mm.
And
Well,
the
that's
entire game, I thought that they were just one step behind us, or they were
No.
going to meet us somewhere.
Well,
See,
we
this
were
is
just
some this
one
is
step behind
this is
you.
a point that I made with Kurt, is that as long as we don't tell them that, they will always think it.
All right, so the cat is out of the bag now. And so this is where, from this point forward, it has to change, because, and I've made this argument, and he's going to argue with me on it, but unless there is an actual chance, and I don't care how much time I put into putting it together, I really don't, unless there is an actual opportunity for one side to short circuit the others, like if the cultists had decided to wait for the investigative team at wherever, ambush them and kill them all, that's a valid end. It sucks in a way, but that's an actual cool end. Is they create the showdown not at the climactic scene, but at another point in the story. Are they breaking the plot? Yes, but it's awesome. At the same time, it should be possible on the other side.
I think that would be okay if you are running a different kind of game. If you are running a one-shot competitive RPG, I expect all the tropes leading up to the plot point, and I expect the final climax. And if that does not happen, I will be disappointed. If that game had ended at 2 hours and we had the showdown at the museum getting the artifacts instead of at the end with the Shebna girls, I would have been disappointed.
My point. That's why
I don't think it would have been a showdown. I think it would have been this really awkward moment because as investigators, you can't hurt us until you actually see us doing evil. Like, you guys are good people. You can't do bad things.
I'm a sheriff's deputy. If you were stealing something,
I
would arrest you.
Yeah, they had evidence to link you into things, and they would have arrested you. And the minute you became the minute you guys started being arrested, you guys would have reacted with violence, which would have justified their violence.
It would have exploded.
It would have escalated quickly.
Yes.
Escalated quickly.
Yeah. Because the problem is you're right. They won't start it, but you guys will. So the minute you're like, stop, and you're like, cultist, time to cult up. You know what I mean?
No, but I still think it needs to be. So if you want to keep that going and you guys come upon that situation, one, you need to react realistically. But at the same time, the threat has to be there and it has to be real.
Well, I think if you're running a longer term game where, one cultist gets taken down, or maybe even 5 cultists get taken down in the act of trying to steal this item, and then the plot can pick back up later, everybody's made different cultist characters or whatever, then that's definitely fine. But when you're doing the one shot, you're going towards a certain end, and I feel like that's expected.
I agree very much. I think to kind of put a pretty bow around it, there's a difference in philosophy between what we would call a one shot or a movie and a several games that are chained together that would be a series. There's a difference in philosophy in the way you put those together, because you're very much right. If we watch any superhero movie, which I call Age of Ultron or whatever, it has to build to a climax and play on the tropes, and that's the movie. Whereas in a series, you can have it derail and have all kinds of problems and trouble that goes along the way. You still end up with a climax, and it may be very different than what you intended, but you still end up with a climax of some sort. But that's a different philosophy in how you put that together and write that game.
But if Batman stops the Joker at the bank, then you're kind of like, okay, well, that was a cool cartoon episode for 20 minutes, but I paid for an hour-and-a-half movie. I want the epic
Well, not only that,
scene.
what about the Dark Knight movie where the Joker robs that bank? What if Batman arrived then, punched him in the face, and Gordon locked him up? That's the worst movie ever.
That's what I just said.
No, but I'm saying like in that. You said a cartoon.
Right, it's a 20-minute cartoon. It's not the hour and a half movie that I paid
for. Now I see where you're going now. No, okay, I agree.
That's the plot for a single cartoon in the series. That's not the that's not the movie.
Sure, but I still maintain you need the threat. I've got to have
the
threat be
I
real.
want the threat to be there.
Well, that's the thing is, that's right.
But I don't want it to end there.
Right.
So for me, it's your job as a GM to create that perceived threat. It's your job as the GM to create that perceived threat without actually having the final showdown happen there.
That's where I was talking to you about. It's
that's
all about the illusion of it. It doesn't. Perception being reality. If they thought it could happen, which they did, like what Carrie said, then it was a real thing, and they were like, go, 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 go. And I think it doesn't matter if it's going to happen or not. They think it is, so that it is.
Well, and I think that's why we tried to make a lot of our plans plausible. So yes, we were stealing the wax. But we made sure to check out some of the items. We made sure to go about rescheduling the field trip in a legit way so as not to alert them to every piece of our puzzle.
Right. All right. Well, I think that kind of closes that off. It's a great time if you can do it well. Don't be scared to do it, I think would be my biggest point. Make sure you set yourself up to succeed. Manage expectations, talk to your players. And really, as long as everyone has a good time, it doesn't matter. It's all about just having a good time at the game. The winning and losing or whatever isn't the important part of it. It's the lead up to it.
Oh, definitely.
It's the chase, not the catch.
Well, it's a little bit the catch.
Should we tell the listeners who won?
I suppose we probably should. So at the climax of it, the giant ritual to summon Shebna Guroth to have the black sun rise across the earth. There was a large shootout that happened.
There were some casualties.
There were some casualties, some pretty comedic ones. Of course, as everything with dice, there are great roles and bad roles. And there was a professor who jumped out to bait the cultists and took a shotgun to the face and immediately died, which was a pretty amazing and funny thing. Well, in Jaws fashion, Dave mentioned the climax of the ritual. It was great the way it happened mechanically. That's the one thing I will say is there are strange coincidences that just sort of happen as the game goes on. But there was an ambulance there and a paramedic there. He threw an oxygen tank into this ritual pit where there was fire and badness going on, with the intention to shoot the ritual. At the cultists had to accumulate so many successes to complete the ritual. They complete the ritual, and in the same initiative turn, literally number on initiative number 14, the oxygen bottle is shot. And of course, in most of your traditional ritual castings, the moment of true weakness of the ritual is when the gate is opening and budding. So the gate is opening on 14. On the same initiative turn 14, an oxygen bottle gets shot, which causes it to explode and fire and badness, which closes the gate, right then afterwards. So I don't know who you would say.
But of course, small amounts of, I don't know, what do you want to call them? The black go to the woods, small children seep out into the world.
But the world is still spinning, so I guess it's sort of, not all the investigators survived, so the world is still here, so I guess investigators win.
That's a little column A, column B.
The investigators win with heavy losses.
True, yeah, there were casualties on both sides. So, yeah, great time. Try it. Give it a shot.
Cultists always get another go.
Shubni Guroth lives.
I think really, though, we really have to take a moment of silence for the poor Shoggoth that gave its life.
So that we could all have a good time.
Rest in peace, Shoggoth.
Start your own small convention with friends. Spend a 3-day weekend together gaming. Try competitive gaming. Give it a shot. Have some fun.
Make sure you get enough roast beef and like stuff like that. Just saying.
Right on, right on, right on.
Right on.
Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.